Now, more briefly, I want us to look at some more tests. The next test is going to be the test of geography. Do they simply know the place? Well, you know, one of the things you find out is how ropey people's knowledge of geography can be away from the place where they live. So my knowledge of the geography of Texas really is pretty bad. I've got to say there are all sorts of places that are probably huge that I've never heard of. And so one of the things that we would expect to be the case is if people were writing stories a long way away, they're not going to know the names of places. Well, look at the names of places we get in the four Gospels. The most common town name is Jerusalem, the capital city. The second most common is Nazareth, the town associated with Jesus. But it's not just that you have those two known. You also have some quite obscure villages known. Places like Bethphage, a little village near Jerusalem. You get Chorazin known up in Galilee. Well, the question is this. How would someone in Syria, in Turkey, in Greece, in Italy, in Egypt know about the names of those villages? I mean, I just can't think how they would know. In Rome, probably the best place to go to a bookshop. Well, if you went and bought a book about geography, it would tell you about the great places on earth to go and see before you die, which didn't include Bethphage, which didn't include Chorazin, you see? So what you find is, how would people well away from the place know these things? And it's not just that they know the names of places. They know things about them. They know that Capernaum is next to the sea. They know the way where the land goes up and down. They know traveling times, all those sorts of things. How do they get that right? We compare that with what's mentioned in apocryphal Gospels. The four canonical Gospels, 12 to 14 towns each, total of 23. Gospel of Philip, 2 towns, Jerusalem and Nazareth. But it thinks that Nazareth is Jesus' middle name. So that's not very good. So it's only really got one place correctly mentioned, that's Jerusalem, which is the capital. What about Gospels of Peter and of the Saviour? They've got one town and it's called Jerusalem, the capital. And what about 13 other earliest apocryphal Gospels? How many town names have they got? 0. So all of the correctly placed town names in the 16 earliest apocryphal Gospels and fragments, 1. Jerusalem, the capital of the whole area. That to me is not very impressive geographical knowledge. But it also means that rather than being evidence against the 4 Gospels, the apocryphal Gospels are in fact evidence for the 4 Gospels, because they show what would happen if people did make up stories. They are the controlled experiment, if you like, that show what could go on another way. Now I want us to look at the number of words there are in the four Gospels. That's the 4 left-hand columns, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And I've given you 5 non-biblical Gospels on the right-hand columns. Okay, I want you to fix your eyes on those 4 left-hand columns very carefully and look at their shape. I've just changed slide to the number of place names. This is not just town names, this is places like Golgotha, river names and so on. Did you notice the change of shape? This is the number of words per gospel. This is the number of place names per gospel. You notice a sort of big drop-off effect here. They're just not very good on place names. But there's another thing. What if we do place names as a proportion of length? What happens? Ooh. We find that all 4 Gospels have an amazing evenness of place name mentions. I began looking at this in an English version, had someone do a bit of research for me, and I said to her, you know, I have a suspicion that place names occur more in the 4 canonical Gospels than in the other ones. Could you go and look at it? So she worked on an English translation, English Standard Version. She found that the 4 canonical Gospels, between 4.6 and 4.9 place names per 1,000 words. That was what you wanted to know tonight, wasn't it? Now, the great thing about this is you can actually do this experiment at home. Just get the electronic text of the 4 Gospels, get all the capitalized words at the front, strip out all the ones that aren't place names, and just work it out. It's not hard. This is the sort of thing you can replicate. And what's the amazing thing is that the 4 Gospels have the same evenness. How are we to explain it? I've got a great explanation. Okay, this is it. Luke talks to Mark. Mark, how many words do you have in your Gospel? Mark goes through really carefully counting the number of words he has in his gospel. Now, by the way, the words were not separated in Greek manuscripts, so that made it a bit harder for Mark to count. But he went through very dutifully, and he counted, and he worked out the number of place names. And then Luke said, hey, I want you to find out the number of words, I want the number of place names, and I want a proportion. And when Luke had worked this out, he actually created a narrative with the same proportion of place names in. Matthew and John heard about this. They thought it was a great idea that they would replicate this same feature. Just before computing, this sort of thing, people didn't have much to do before TV, and so that's what they did. Well, is that really plausible? Would they get that sort of pattern if they simply put in place names to make the narrative look authentic? One would put in too many, one would put in too few. It just wouldn't work out. But what if they simply told things as they happened? They're all the same sort of narrative. They're telling you gospel, naturally putting in place names as they're relevant. Is it plausible that if their narratives are long enough, they would have roughly the same proportion? That to me seems a more plausible explanation. It's not that they have the same proportion in every passage. Matthew 5-7, Sermon on the Mount, no place names. But over the narrative as a whole, we find the same concern for geography, not in a way that sort of is intrusive, that's trying to give you extra details you don't know. It's just trying to give you some relevant details. It's about real time and space. That, to me, explains what's going on. I've got another test. It's the test of botany. Now, does anyone know the story of Zacchaeus, yeah? The little man, yeah? Do you know what sort of tree he climbed up? Sycamore tree. Can anyone sing that for us? Yeah. Anyone? Can we do this together? No. Okay, we won't. Right, okay, more difficult question. This is the next level. What town was he in when he climbed a sycamore tree? Jericho. Oh, we got an answer from a few places. This is great. You're a good audience tonight. Fantastic. He was in Jericho, and that's in Luke's gospel. So the question is, what's the question? What's the question we're going to ask? Are there sycamore trees in Jericho? The answer is, you bet. You see, look here. There are some guys in this sycamore tree in Jericho. You see that? They are standing in Jericho. Now, how could Luke know that? I have three possibilities, but let's start with the first two. One possibility is he went to Jericho and he saw there are sycamores. The other is he spoke to someone who went to Jericho who saw there are sycamores. The third possibility is aliens from outer space told him. But I'm going to discount that third explanation. There may be others, but let's just focus on those first two. Those first two seem to me the most worthy of consideration. What we've got is this is the sort of thing that people who've been to the place know. Now, if the Gospels are getting this right, they're not just getting it right on place names and names and plants, they're getting the shape of house right, they're getting the shape of the temple right, they're getting the coinage right, they're getting the social stratification right, they're getting the religious setting right. After a while, you think, there are so many opportunities for them to go wrong if they are making it up. So many opportunities, and they don't seem to go wrong like that. The other thing we can say is that sort of sycamore tree, Ficus sycamoris, where did it occur? Well, I went to the most authoritative source of all, Wikipedia, this is the modern distribution, but I checked it's also the same as the ancient distribution. There are no Ficus sycamoris in Turkey, Greece, Italy. It's there, Syria, Palestine, Egypt. In certain countries, the narrator couldn't even have heard of those things unless he'd actually talked to someone who'd been in the land. So this is the sort of thing that fits very well if the narrative is true.